All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining me today, giving up a little bit of your midday time to learn more about this grant program, which opened this morning. So looking forward to getting going with all of you. A couple of housekeeping items. Please leave your audio on mute until we get to the question and answer period. And then even then, if you're not speaking directly, leave your mute on so we reduce background noise. Welcome to have your camera off or on, whatever feels comfortable for you today. I will be sharing my screen for about the first half of the time together. So that's a really good time to leave your camera off anyway, because it won't be very visible to other attendees. If you'd like to turn your camera on later, that would be just fine. Okay, I'm going to start by introducing myself. My name is Deb Vaughn, and I am the grants manager for Travel Oregon, the Oregon Tourism Commission. I've been here since about mid-August, but I've been working in grants management for most of my career. So really excited to be talking with you about the competitive grants program. I am joined by two colleagues today. Dawn Smallman is here. Dawn is my senior employee at Travel Oregon by about 3 days. So really thrilled that she can join us as well as we continue to get to know this industry and the programs of Travel Oregon together. And then we're also joined by April Knudsen, who many of you who have emailed in questions and for tech support, you've probably gotten an email back from April, who's a fantastic member of our team, and just pleased to have her here helping to support. The chat has been disabled because I'd love for you to use the Q&A function, the question and answer function, to pin your questions. It makes it a little easier for us to track and get to those. And I think that's all the housekeeping that I'm going to do. So let's go ahead and get into content. So my background is in education, and so instead of an agenda, I went ahead and listed some outcomes of things that you can expect to know by the end of this webinar. I will make sure to start right away with eligibility. So if you're in the wrong place because your organization is not eligible to apply, you'll know that right away. We'll go through the key dates in the cycle, talk about the review process. I'll share some information about grant writing success and give you some resources to get additional support. But mostly, I want you to feel as excited as I am to celebrate the wonders of Oregon. I was born and raised in this state, and I love it so much. It is an honor to do this work, and I hope that by the end of this webinar, you are feeling excited to share something about your community with visitors, and because that, I think, is the value of the work that we can do together. All right. I'm going to start with this most technical competitive eligibility, competitive grant program eligibility, so you can make sure you're on the right webinar. The most important factor here is that we support project proposals from organizations that are doing direct work in support of improving the economic impacts of Oregon's travel and tourism industry. This does not necessarily mean that your organization is a tourism-focused organization, but that you do have projects, programs, and activities that directly support that industry. And the second most important thing is that your Oregon Secretary of State registration, if you are a nonprofit organization, is up to date and active at the time of submitting your LOI, which is a letter of intent. Those are due, I'll say this again later in the timeline section, those are due by mid-January. So the best recommendation I have for you is to check ahead of time by clicking on the link, which somebody, I think Dawn will put in the chat for you, to make sure if you are a nonprofit that your status is active. I also want to emphasize that only one application may be submitted per entity, and only one proposal may be submitted per project. So what this means is if you have a project that involves partners, multiple partners cannot put in their own separate requests to Travel Oregon for the same activity. So now is an ideal time to be having conversations with partners about who will be the lead applicant for that collective project together. And then partners are certainly welcome to submit their own proposals for a different project and still be mentioned as a partner on another project, but we're not doing double funding. So be thoughtful maybe about what your top priority is, and spending some collaborative time ahead of an application is time well spent. All right, this grant program was established in 2017, and it has evolved over the years, especially through COVID. But what has remained the same are the key words enshrined in Oregon statute, that these funds are for enhancement, expansion, and promotion. of the visitor industry. So you'll see that language woven throughout the grant guidelines and the requirements of the program. All of this work is aligned with Travel Oregon's vision to make Oregon a welcoming destination. And I believe that you are all key partners in that. In fact, I believe that so strongly. I don't think Travel Oregon can accomplish its mission without all of you. And again, an honor to work on a grant program where we get to really enact that together. In this grant cycle, as I said, it has evolved over time, but for this cycle, the focus will be on supporting marketing and infrastructure projects. This is in response to our annual industry survey that continues to define these two areas as key spaces that our partners need support in. Within marketing and infrastructure, we are looking to fund projects that increase access and inclusivity, and I'll talk a little bit more about examples of that as we go on. So this is in my education-based logical mind, kind of the big picture. Some people might call it a logic model or a theory of change. If those terms are intimidating or you're not sure what they mean, that's okay. We'll just call it a program model. So the goal is sort of the big umbrella term. This is what we're trying to accomplish together in the long term. It's the vision, the highest example of what we can do. The objective is the near-term measurement that we've set as a priority in getting to that goal. There might be multiple objectives enacted at the same time, but they're all headed in the same direction. Then the strategies, that third level that you see on the slide, are the available ways to reach that objectives. So this is where you see the infrastructure and the marketing projects. Those are the strategies that we've selected for this grant cycle to help move towards the objective, which gets us to the goal. Hopefully that makes sense to you. And in looking at this diagram, those infrastructure projects really work towards the enhancement and the expansion, the words that I mentioned from statute, where the marketing projects really focus on promotion. So those are the three terms in statute. And an example of an enhancing infrastructure project might be to improve on an existing experience, whereas an expanded infrastructure project would be creating something that doesn't exist or working to reach a new audience with the thing that you have. A marketing project where you're promoting your work would be to share out an asset. We will, for those of you who are interested in focusing on a marketing related project for this grant cycle, we are doing a webinar on December 10th at 4 p.m. And now that I'm saying that date aloud, it is making me question it because I think that it's actually the following week. And I want to make sure that that is correct. So Dawn, if you could do me a favor and make sure that I've verbally, I'm going to fix it right now. It is on December 19th, webinar December 19th. On marketing specifically. And then the webinar on December 10th, we'll focusing on broadening access and inclusion, that objective. So we'll paste the links to register for those webinars in the chat so that you can join us on those if those topics are of interest. Okay, so those of you who've taken a moment to look at the grant guidelines, we list in there our ideas of the types of projects that we probably are looking to fund this cycle. That list is not comprehensive, and we are actually interested in seeing project ideas that align with these categories of infrastructure and promotion, but that maybe we haven't considered on that list. And that's what the LOI, the letter of intent, is for you to share with us how you see your work connecting with our grant program. And then our staff will provide you with some feedback about where those things line up and what you might want to consider adjusting if you want to go ahead in the application cycle. So some examples of infrastructure projects that we've funded before might be development of culturally relevant programming, products, or materials, an adaptation of services to provide sensory-friendly experiences, honoring people's different ways of processing the world around them, and improvement or innovation of signature events to be more welcoming. Examples of tourism promotion projects include FAM tours focused on expanding relationships with underserved populations, and support for influencer and/or ambassador marketing efforts. So I'm going to ask Dawn to put the competitive guidelines in the chat, a link. And if you haven't reviewed those list of project preferences, please do so. It will give you a good idea of where our thinking is. And then if you'd like to open up the conversation about where your thinking is, you can feel free to reach out to our team. Right, before I go into some more specific examples of previously funded projects in this grant program, I just want to pause here in case you have any questions. So that Q&A box, you can find that in the navigation bar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I'm just going to give us a little bit of silence and let you formulate any questions that might be coming up for you. All right. Kind of move slowly to the next slide as you finish up any thoughts you might have. And again, we'll loop back for more Q&A time at the end of the webinar. Feel free to use that box anytime that something comes up into your mind. So I see that we do have one question about whether a proposal can be both infrastructure and promotion, both enhancement and expansion. I will answer those right now and say you must choose one or the other. So these project examples that you're seeing have been tracked, and you'll have to select this in your LOI and then follow up in your application along either an infrastructure or a marketing path. So an example of an infrastructure project is the project that was funded for the Coquille Indian tribe in the last cycle that helped contribute to the reawakening of Indigenous language by recording interpretive sign information in multiple languages that are accessible by QR codes on the signage. So the infrastructure expense was both the recording and the design and implementation of the signs themselves. What I really like about this project is the broad thinking of the visitor experience, because in addition to providing the recordings in Indigenous languages, which is part of the Reawakening project, they also provided English recordings, which helps support visitors with reduced vision that may have trouble reading the signs, and also signs. This project will be installed on the coast near the Mill Casino, which has harsh weather and the signs may fade over time. So there's a lot of good reasons why this project's comprehensive approach to the visitor experience was really successful in the last cycle. This is an example of another infrastructure project. The Lane Arts Council in Eugene really reinvented their First Friday art walks by shifting the programming that they were offering to highlight additional BIPOC artists to come and perform at those experiences, which in turn is then helping them to expand their visitor demographics. So this is a project that could potentially have been tracked into a marketing project, a promotions project, where they would ask Travel Oregon to help pay for social media and print materials highlighting those artists. In this case, the organization asked us to pay for the actual infrastructure, some of the expenses related to recruiting and bringing the artists to participate. So there's an example for those of you asking about kind of the crossover. Really depends whether you're asking for an infrastructure project or a promotion project would depend on what you're asking Travel Oregon to pay for. And that is something that we can talk about if you'd like to reach out to the grants@traveloregon.com email address. If you're not sure where your project fits, we can certainly strategize together. The final example I'm going to share is the Tillamook Coast Visitors Association, which previously, prior to their application, had done a lot of work on disability access, and now is promoting that work through a formal certification process with Wheel the World. This is a great example of universal design. So by making spaces better for all through a really thoughtful design process, they are seeing all kinds of visitors responding to the promotion about how accessible their space is. So it's not just people using wheelchairs or with other mobility assistive devices, but they are hearing from older adults who may have some trouble with balance, and where a smoother pathway makes it safer for them to visit. families with children that may be using strollers or wagons. All of those visitor experiences are enhanced or are being promoted, I should say. They were enhanced prior to this grant, and now they're being promoted through our specific support. Again, I think I mentioned it before, but I want to plug again the webinar December 19th. That's at noon, focusing on best practices in marketing and promotion. So if Dawn wants to could put that link in the chat, you can register ahead of time. You do need to register for these webinars in order to get the link, just like you did for this one. Okay, here are the key dates to mark on your calendar if you're looking at pursuing a proposal in this grant cycle. The LOI became available online just this morning, so you're welcome to log in with the link that we'll put in the chat at any time and take a look at that. The deadline to submit an LOI is January 15th. But I do want to flag that the earlier you submit the LOI, the more time you have to work on a potential application. So whenever possible, let me back up. All LOIs will receive feedback from staff. Some of the feedback may be, you know what, this project idea is not in alignment with the grant program and you're not invited to submit an application. The process stops there. Some of the feedback, for most of them, what we're going to work with you on is, here's some suggestions for staff about how to make this idea even stronger and go ahead and move forward to the application. So we encourage you to utilize the feedback from our staff to enhance your work going forward. And we always want to be in conversation with you. I also want to emphasize that a no in this cycle does not mean we never want another proposal from you. It means things aren't lining up and we're not seeing the connection this time. Let's talk about your work going forward. We may need to table that conversation until we're done reviewing for this grant cycle, but please know that a no this cycle does not mean the door is closed to you. Let's see. We will review the LOIs and provide feedback in the order that they're received. So again, the sooner you submit, the more time you have to incorporate feedback and consider your application if you're invited to move forward. Applications will be due by February 27th if you're invited to that step. Also, we'll let you know if it's an eligibility issue, if the reason your LOI was declined was because of eligibility, or if it was because your project concept didn't line up well with the grant program. You'll have that information. Our goal is really to make sure that you're spending your time wisely if you're invited to craft an application. You can access the application questions and the LOI questions ahead of time without logging into the online system. The links to those are in the grant guidelines. So we do encourage you to begin thinking about how you might respond to those questions, and that will help you refine and craft your project idea as well. And let's see, February 27th, just to highlight that no applications or materials will be accepted after that deadline. So it is worth looking ahead to see what supplemental documents you might want to submit so that you can start organizing and getting those together. Funding decisions will be announced in mid-June, and then you would have until, if you received funding, you would have until early November of 2026 to complete your project date. So timelines are really important in this grant program. You want to make sure that you're proposing a scope of work that can reasonably be accomplished between about June 17th, when the award would be made, and November 3rd. So be thinking about an 18-month project timeline. And you don't have to give us your 10-phase plan, because 10 phases in 18 months is probably a bit ambitious. So, we share that timeline in the hopes that it helps you to scale your request appropriately, and present us with something that can reasonably be completed by November 2026. That's our goal, is for your work to be successful within the time available. All right, probably should have put this slide earlier, but wanted to make sure you hung on for that critical information, the award amounts. So award amounts will range anywhere from $20,000 to $150,000. That's what you can request. That top award amount did increase over last year, and that is in recognition of continued rising costs, especially when we're supporting infrastructure projects that do sometimes include physical structures. And so we wanted to acknowledge that we know that construction costs and contracting costs continue to rise. So last year, the maximum award was $100,000. So I'm pleased that we can do that. I'm also really pleased that we are able to budget to award slightly over $5 million in this cycle. That is significantly more than we did in the last cycle as well. So there's some money on the table. You do have to provide documentation of any funds spent if you're awarded a grant. So save all your receipts. And we will talk more about that as the awards are made, and our staff is here to help support you. But we just want you to know that most of this grant is paid out as a reimbursement. If budgets are a question that's on your mind, we do request a budget from you at the LOI stage and then a revised budget at your application stage. The webinar we're offering on January 6th at 3 p.m. will focus specifically on helping to create strong project budgets. I'm thrilled that Dawn is going to join me for that one, and we have a lot to talk about. So if budgets are an area where you're a little unsure, you just like some extra support to hear from our team what we're looking for in a project budget, feel free to register. We'd love to have you after the new year. All right, I'm going to move somewhat quickly through the review criteria because it is published on pages 10 and 11 in the grant guidelines with a lot more detail than what is on this slide. But I just want to be really upfront with you about what we're looking for in an excellent grant application. So the first category is project intent. You can think of that as the what and the who. So if we're doing our, our 5 W's of good writing, this is the what are you trying to do and who are you doing it with and for? Are you centered on increasing access and inclusion? Do you have supportive relationships or past successes in the area of work that you're looking to do? And on the real surface level, is your project strongly connected to the preferred project types within those infrastructure and promotions categories we talked about earlier? The next category is immediacy of the need. This is the why now. This is the why now. So we're looking for an urgency that is demonstrated by having your permitting in place, having a clear distribution plan if you're doing a promotion project. And why is it in your community right now that this particular project is the most timely investment of our funds? The next category is feasibility, and this is the when. This is where the timeline really comes into play. We're looking for, is it viable? Have you taken into account weather and other contingencies? Contracting processes and supply chain issues are pretty persistent. So how have you been thoughtful about how that might impact your completion date? Do you have reasonable contractor bids? Are they complete? Are you shovel ready, metaphorically and literally? So that when those funds are awarded, you can get right to work. And how might partners help you to achieve those goals? The budget, this is the how. This is the nitty gritty. This is a clear use of our grant funds for infrastructure and marketing expenses, even if you have other components to your project. Are you providing fair compensation for the expertise that is required to complete your project, including those with lived experience in the areas that you're looking to work in? If you have matching funds, they can demonstrate additional budgetary strength. Those may be in-kind resources or cash resources, but I want to emphasize that matching funds are not required in this particular grant program. So it's certainly not a necessity, but it can be a way that you demonstrate your readiness and capability to carry out the project. The case for support. This is really where you get to do your double check. Is your application complete and answers all the questions to the best of your knowledge? Do you have letters of support that are specific to the project itself, not general endorsements of your organization and its value, but specifically about how the community and other partners will show up to help you get this project done? And really more broadly, the question I like to ask myself in this category is, how does your community buy into your great idea? And that would be how you begin to make a really strong case for support. The final category is welcoming destination. You'll notice that that has more points available because This really is the point. This is the big goal, the big vision that we all have together, and the reason why we're doing this grant program. So, how are you showing off and celebrating the parts of your community that you're most excited about to visitors in a way that really invites them in and connects to their own experience? And at the same time, how are you also honoring the capacity and desire of your community itself? Bringing those two things together is what creates the most powerful and incredible projects. And that's what we're looking for. All right, we are almost at the end of the content, so keep putting those questions in the Q&A and we'll loop back to those in just a couple of minutes. Just wanted to share our review process so that you have an expectation of what's to come. The goal is that we provide reviews at different stages so that you are provided with multiple points of view and multiple opportunities for success. So our investments team staff will read letters of intent to understand how the project idea aligns with the grant program and its goals, verify your eligibility status, and really our goal in this stage is to help applicants craft the strongest possible application by offering suggestions about how to clarify project goals and scope. If you're invited to submit an application, once you do that, staff will then use the additional detail that you've provided to understand the different ways that the proposal supports the grant priorities and preferences. These things might include, does the project leverage additional funds? Do you have matching funds, in other words? Is the project well aligned with the project preferences? Does the proposal emphasize, let me pause here because I do want to lean on this just a little bit. Those of you on the webinar who had an infrastructure project that was funded in the last grant cycle, the one that's just finishing up in this April, are you submitting a proposal that emphasizes the marketing of that infrastructure work? So for those of you who might fall into this category, I would be happy to speak with you separately about how you might do that. But we really do want to create a space for really celebrating and sharing out the things that you were able to build in the last cycle with a new audience to come and enjoy them. So that's a little bit of a sidebar, but I know that there are some of you on this webinar that are in that category. So I'm happy to loop back with you outside of this webinar to talk about that. And then are the necessary permits secured? So in that staff review, we're really looking for those kind of baseline measures that this proposal is solid, ready to go to the next stage of review, which is that a team of trained reviewers will score each application using the information on the previous slide, those 6 review categories. These numeric scores are then used to help determine the most strategic investment of grant funds in this cycle. So gave you a lot of detail there, but just want you to know what's coming and how we are thoughtfully moving through these steps with you. I'm going to move into the section of the webinar about resources. And the very first one in the mission of helping you have the most successful grant application possible is to encourage you to connect with your RDMO. So Oregon is divided into 7 tourism regions pictured on the slide, and each region has identified an organization to serve as a regional destination management organization. So each of those groups partners with Travel Oregon to help attract visitors to their region. And here are some ways on the slide that those organizations can help you in your project. They can be critical advertising partners. Some of them have their own funding programs and can bring additional resources to the table in your grant application and later. They can help resource your work through ongoing relationships, connect you to other people in the region that might be complementing or doing similar work. They can be very helpful with data collection and visitor statistics, and I think this is the referral point that I've been doing the most often. Organizations that might be new to the tourism space, this is where connecting with your RDMO can be so helpful and supportive. You don't have to start at nothing in terms of collecting numbers and understanding the demographics of people who are in your region. And again, there's all kinds of professional development and learning opportunities for those of you who are new to tourism. So that is the #1 resource I refer people to. We'll put a link in the chat of the website that Travel Oregon maintains that has links to all of those organizations. All right. Some specific grant writing tips that are really helpful in this particular grant program. And then I'll do some broader ones on the next slide. So detailing numbers Data can really help you make the case for why your project is so needed. It can also help you identify the metrics that you will use to measure impact. So having those numbers in an application is really helpful. Planning ahead allows you to show project feasibility by having your application ready to go at the time of application. And so this goes to the readiness factor, kind of the why now and the viability of your project. Be specific in telling us what you want to do with the grant fund. So this goes back to the question that was asked earlier about, can I do infrastructure and promotion? Technically, you could have both of those components in a project scope, but you need to choose one that you're asking Travel Oregon to help pay for, and you'll have to identify that in your LOI and your application. So the clearer you are about your project intent, the easier it will be for you and for us to see alignment with the grant programs. Letters of support, these are not required. However, these documents, when written honestly in support of the project you're asking us to fund, can really help make the case for support and to show that buy-in from your community and how they understand how your great idea is going to benefit them and your area and your region. Don't make assumptions. This might seem like a given, but I want to acknowledge that there isn't always space in the application to explain every detail and history of your organization and your community. However, I want to encourage you not to assume that a reader knows your history and your status. You should provide some context to help them understand your situation, and this will help back up the why now component. So don't assume that they know your community. And give them enough context to understand why this is so critical for you at this moment. Take a look at the grant guidelines. Our team has worked really hard to make a document that is clear and helpful, and we think it's pretty comprehensive. So if you have a question, your first checkpoint can always be the grant guidelines. They're online, so they're available to you 24/7. And if you don't find what you're looking for in the grant guidelines, reach out and ask a question. We are available to help and happy to hear from you. All right, other general pathways to success. I mentioned it before, the earlier you submit your LOI, the more time you have if you're invited to submit an application to incorporate that staff feedback. On a real technical level, it also helps avoid high traffic periods in our online system, which can sometimes occur on or just before deadlines, and that can cause delays. We know life happens, technology's gonna glitch, so you will help reduce your own stress level, I expect, if you don't wait until the last minute to submit. I've said already, our goal is to help you succeed, and I think that goes for most staff at most funders. So whenever possible, we encourage you to incorporate staff feedback into your work going forward. Using the review criteria, I find many funders are getting more and more comfortable being explicit about the things on which they review your application. And so the information in our grant guidelines on pages 10 and 11, use that review criteria to compare to what you're telling us in your LOI and application and see if you're dialed into those components. Invite an outside reader. This goes to people, not everybody may know your community. So inviting a friend with a fresh perspective who doesn't deeply know your project or your organization can provide you with a similar perspective as to what a reviewer might notice. And that can be really helpful in refining your proposal before you submit it to us. And then right back to where we started with the webinar, we don't want you to use your time completing an LOI only to discover later that your organization isn't eligible. So it's one of the biggest hangups that we find in this process. And so take that time ahead to make sure that your Secretary of State registration is up to date and your organization is eligible. If you're not sure, that's a really quick email to our grants inbox, and we'd be happy to talk with you about that ahead of time. All right, this is our last slide. So just about to move into Q&A. I want to here's the highlight the dates of those 3 webinars. The first one focused on broadening access and inclusion. Then and Michelle Woodard will join me for that conversation. Then December 19th, marketing and promotion. We'll be joined by Carrie from Travel Oregon's marketing team to share some best practices and industry standards with you if that's the type of project you're thinking of proposing. And then January 6th, Dawn and I will talk about creating a strong project budget. The final two webinars, January 8th and 10th, are just open drop-in hours. You do need to register ahead of time. We're not planning any content for those sessions. Those are just leading right up to that last minute of the LOI deadline, and wanted to make sure that our staff was available if you would like to drop in and ask a question that feels maybe difficult to ask during via email. So those are just open times available for you where we'll be present and available. And with that, this is the end of the content. So I am going to go ahead and stop my screen sharing so that we can get into some questions. Okay. All right, Dawn, thank you for pasting all of that in the chat. And I know that we have some stuff over in the Q&A. So Dawn, do you want to read any of those or?
Sure. The first one is from, excuse me if I get anyone's name wrong. The first one's from Leisha Wood. Can I have multiple projects under one infrastructure?
That is a good idea. That's a good question, Leisha. The answer is it's possible. The question I think that I would ask for that is, so I think that the grant application isn't really long enough to describe in detail multiple discrete projects. So you might have multiple components of a project that you propose to us, but I would ask you, what's your sort of holistic vision for how those things are connected to each other? And how are they, what is the overarching goal that work helps you deliver on? If you're talking about two very disparate or discrete projects that are not connected to each other, that would be a great time for a conversation where you could reach out to me and we could strategize about which of them felt like it had the strongest connection to the grant program. I just don't want you to get spread too thin in trying to describe multiple projects in one grant application. And I would also encourage you to be thoughtful about how big a scope of work your organization can take on in the timeline of the grant program.
Next question's from Tim Gresseth. Would creation of a master site plan for a popular visitor location in the Columbia River Gorge qualify for this grant opportunity?
Hi, Tim. It's nice to see you on screen. This has potential, and I think that probably if this is what you're considering, a follow-up, a one-on-one outside of the webinar. I don't see anything that says that's not eligible for consideration. But yeah, we should just talk about how that fits into the process and your larger goals. So yeah, feel free to reach out. I check the grants. We all work cooperatively on that grants at Travel Oregon, so you can reach me there. Thanks, Tim.
Next question comes from Stephanie Picot. For completion date, if this project would be a piece of a larger project, would the whole project need to be completed or just the portion being funded by the grant?
That's a great question, Stephanie. Just the portion funded by the grant itself.
Next question is from Emily Woodworth. As far as accessibility goes, is there greater consideration for projects that meet ADA standards?
I think I'm going to answer that in two ways, Emily. And the first is to say that philosophically, any accessibility project should at bare minimum meet ADA standards. And I would see that as a priority in honestly, I would say any kind of a construction project should at bare minimum be aligned with the Americans with Disabilities Act's requirements for public spaces. But if you're asking sort of within the broader space of making destinations more accessible to more people, there is not an explicit priority in this grant program for those that focus on physical access versus those that focus on making an experience that is more accessible to more people. I think that answers your question, but if it doesn't, come back in and ask again, or again, reach out to me one-on-one and we can talk in detail.
From Carolyn Kingsnorth, can an early LOI be refined and resubmitted based on staff feedback?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Caroline. And yes, in general, if your first for a if your first LOI, the project is just really not in alignment, we would certainly give you some feedback. And then as long as there's eligibility, you have the option to try a second time and propose a different project. If the LOI and the project idea are generally in alignment with the grant program, we're more likely to give you some coaching and feedback and then move you straight to an application. So there is kind of a second chance go around. And because what we'd like to see is a really broad, diverse, incredible slate of projects from around the state. So we want to work with you to get there.
I'm going to hop over to another one from Carol, and I'll return back to Stephanie's. From Carolyn again, can an infrastructure project be phased, i.e., can be part of completed prior to what Travel Oregon funds would fund?
I think that in general, the answer to this is yes, Carolyn, that phasing is allowable. And it sounds like you've got a specific idea in mind. So I think why don't you ping me at the grants inbox and let's set up a time to talk about your specific project and what those phases are looking like, and get lined up. But I think generally, yes, it would be okay to invite Travel Oregon to support a component of a larger project, but I think we should talk. So thank you for the question.
Next one's a multi-part one, and I'm putting it in the chat to you, Deb, so you can look at it
Thank you,
while I
Dawn.
read it out loud. Yeah.
Okay.
What is the start date for project expenses? Does the grant only fund expenses accrued after the June 17th, 2025 announcement date? Or will it fund expenses accrued after the application submission, but before the award announcement?
It's nice to see your name in the chat, Stephanie. We've worked together before. So I would say that the start date for project expenses should be no earlier than June 17th, 2025. So I will go back and check and confirm in the guidelines, but generally funders don't pay for expenses incurred prior to the awarding of funds. So I think that you should plan the project for which you are requesting Travel Oregon to support should not start before June 17th, and it should not complete after that November 2nd, I think it is, of 2026. So that would mean you wouldn't start working on the project other than developing partnerships and, enlisting the support of your community until that award was made. And feel free, again, reach out if you want to talk kind of details about the nuance of your proposal.
That's it for questions.
So far, as soon as you say that's it for questions, people will come up with more. But thank you, Dawn, for fielding those. I appreciate it. And thank you to those who asked. So we have a little bit of time left. So if there are any outstanding questions or someone would prefer to unmute and ask verbally, we can do that.
Hi, this is Michelle Woodard again. Thank you so much for this. And based on your last answer, I just want to clarify, we've been working on trail accessibility for a while now, and I just want to make sure that something we've already done work on would still qualify for the next phase of development.
Yes, I think if you're in a phase, then yeah, so if you've completed phase 1 and are now asking for support in beginning phase 2, then that seems perfectly reasonable.
Thank you, Deb.
Yeah, absolutely. Sue, I see you've raised your hand. You want to unmute?
Yeah, thanks for being here and having this webinar. I'm working on a project that's converting it's a rails to trails project, converting an old trestle bridge that was part of a mill in Oak Ridge and trying to convert that to pedestrian, which we think is going to be a huge project. I was considering applying to this grant for kind of informational signs and signage. Would it be possible, would this grant be appropriate to fund kind of, signage and history and background for this bridge? This is a project that we haven't quite started yet. So would be,
yes, we can.
Would this be appropriate for that?
Yeah, we could fund a project that hasn't started yet. And I think that signage is certainly something that we've supported with this program before. I think the questions that you would probably want to think about is who are the visitor audiences that maybe haven't engaged with your destination previously that you would like to welcome in with the new signage and the kind of re-envisioned project. And then if this is a project that you haven't started any work on yet, thinking about how you can demonstrate in your application that you're ready to begin work. And ready to go. Again, that you have the funding lined up that you need, that the partners are in place, that you've got you're thinking about who the contractors for the design work, construction bids, all of those kinds of things, just to show that you're ready to go. But that seems like that has
Gotcha.
okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, reach out if you have more
Okay.
questions. Yeah, thanks, Sue.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Great. All right. Well, you have the contact information. So you can reach out to us. Dawn and I and the team will be just as available over email as we are here. So we will go ahead and conclude this webinar today. And thank you all for joining us and spending your time. And I promised we'd get you out before the top of the hour. So mission accomplished. And really looking forward to hearing from many of you through this application process and into the future. So thank you for the time and for all the work you do in community, and pleased to be with you today. Take good care.